Let's learn about inputs in HTML. The first input I want to show you is the text input. You can create an input by using the input element, and then you can use the type attribute to define a certain type. And as you can see, we have a lot of different types right here. And to create a text input field, we basically select the text input type. And once we save, we basically have our input field right here where we can type basic text. If you want to indicate what the input is used for, you can use a placeholder to show the user a certain text, like username, for example. And now, once we save the website, we see that the user basically sees username right here. So this indicates to the user that this field is probably used to create a username. So I could, for example, create my username right here now. For a lot of inputs, you also want to use an ID field like username and a name field like username. Those two attributes are especially important when you work with JavaScript and CSS. Creating a password works pretty similar by creating an input field and using a type of password. As you can see, if we type something inside of the password field, it is now hidden. Again, we can use the placeholder field as well here, and those attributes work pretty much for most input fields. A tip if you work inside of Visual Studio Code is that you can basically type the name of the tag, which is input, followed by a colon, and then the type of the input field you want to use. Let's say we want to use an email input field. By using colon email and pressing enter, you basically auto-generate a basic template for an email field. Now you could enter a name, which could be email, and an ID, which could be email, for example. Once we save, we have an input field for our email, which could be heyo@gmail.com. To create an input field for a number, we can create an input field again with the type of number. And for the number input field, we can also define a min value, which could be 0, and a max value, which could be 100, for example. And as you can see, if we type like 90 inside of this input field and we are like going upwards, we can just go up to 100. And the same obviously goes in the opposite direction. To create a checkbox, we can again create an input field of type checkbox. And we can, for example, give the checkbox a name of is broke and an ID of is broke. And once we save, we basically have our checkbox right here, which we can check and uncheck. The checkbox also has a checked attribute, and once we save, you can see our checkbox is checked. And if we uncheck it and save our file, our checkbox is basically checked again. So this checked attribute basically makes sure that the website, once it loads, has a checkbox that is already checked. Radio buttons are pretty similar to a checkbox, but it's probably easier to understand if I just show it to you. Like this, we have a radio button, and we can, for example, create 3 different radio buttons right here, and we can check every single radio button. But if we use the same name for each radio button, like has pants, and now we just copy this name and paste it into all of the 3 radio buttons, we can check one radio button, we can try to check the second one, but as you can see, once we check the first radio button, it unchecks the second radio button. So this name attribute basically allows you to connect different radio buttons and make sure that you are just able to select one single radio button. And this is really good if you want to make sure that the user has to choose between different options, for example, and is just able to choose one single option. To create an input field that allows the user to select the date, we can use the date type. And once we save, we basically have this date picker where the user can open a date form, if you want to say it like that, and select a desired date, for example. You can also give the user the option to upload a file by using the file input field. And once you save the code and update your HTML file, you have the option to choose a file from here. And this gives you the option to upload an image, for example, or whatever. Usually when working with input fields, you use them inside of a form most of the time, and every form needs to have the option to submit the form to a server, for example. So if you think about Facebook, you type in your username, you type in your password, and then you press a button. And this button allows you to register, to log in, whatsoever. And this button is basically the submit button. So this button tells the browser to submit the form to a server. And to create this button, you can use an input field as well, because in the end, a button press is just an input that the user gives. And you can create that input field by using input:submit. And this will create an input field of type submit. And you can create a value, which could be register, for example. The value is just the text of the button. And if you click register, you would submit the form to a server if all of this was inside of a form, which it isn't right now, but usually you use this input field inside of a form to submit a form. And something that you use oftentimes in combination with the input fields is the label, and the label allows you to create a text that is connected to a certain input field. So imagine we have an input of type text that allows you to type in a gamer tag, for example. So you have this input field that allows you to type in a gamer tag, and now you want to create a label, and this label should be connected to this gamer tag. So we can, for example, write a text inside of this label, which could also be write your gamer tag, for example, or write your username, whatsoever. And once we click this text, nothing is going to happen because this label is not yet connected to our gamer tag input field. And to connect your label to your input field, you need to create an ID, and that ID can, for example, be gamer tag or whatever. The ID is something you can choose as you want. The only important thing is that this for tag matches the ID of the input field you want to connect your label to. So in our case, it has to be gamer tag as well. And once we save, we can now click our label basically, and it will highlight or select our input field, and we can just write inside of our input field without having to select the input field separately. And this is all you need to know about inputs in HTML.